welcome to Questions and Concerns. I am the wistful Wallace, and I am joined by the bootylicious Binkus. My question to you this week, Binkus, would be: what is a good alternative to Big Pharma?
That's an interesting question. The better alternative, hmm, because the idea of big pharma arises from uh, the idea that, well, one, we need drugs to be made. We need them to be made um, with good quality and with some efficiency, and the natural way that that's done in like a capitalist democratic society is to just set up like some basic regulation and allow companies with the resources to get into that industry to buy patents of to create patents on good potential new drugs that come out of universities, spend some money on human trials, and if they pass the human trials and seem like good prospects, put them into production. And that's a model that it's a delivery model. But the problem with the model is that, one, it's an industry that naturally leads itself to oligopoly because it's such a high cost of entry. It's not the only one, but the difference between this one and others is that this is healthcare. So my concern is how dependent we are on a handful of big pharmaceutical companies for survival as a human species and a human society. So
Do you see it as in dire terms as without pharmaceuticals we would just die out as a species?
modern life wouldn't be possible without it anymore. It's the same way that other key infrastructure like running water is essential. Like, yes, we can survive without it and it will become dependent on wells again, but the society we live in today won't be the same.
Yeah, no, it'll have destroyed the entire society. I take your point.
Yes, so that's my point, is that so much of the population is dependent on medication for, and I'm not talking about just in the negative sense, just in any sense, just to heal from injury, to live a normal lifespan with chronic disease. The rate of what used to be called metabolic syndrome and then evolved into syndrome X because everything needs a cool name. What essentially is, it's the syndrome of too many people are fat.
Too many people are fat.
That's literally what it is. Too many people are fat. When you're fat, having a high proportion of fat in your body, most of your fat is stored around your organs or in your skin. The one in your skin you see, but the one around your organs keeps them warm and insulates, but it also starts to affect their function. And being overweight is strongly associated with starting to develop an overactive immune system. The immune system is implicated in many, many chronic diseases. I would say the majority of chronic diseases are connected to inflammation in one way or another. Anything from rheumatoid arthritis to Crohn's disease, people who are gluten intolerant. That's inflammation.
Because of this kind of metabolic shift, or what do they call it? Factor X.
Syndrome X.
Syndrome X. Because people are pigging out. As you mentioned on our last episode, people are not living longer anymore.
No, people are... now, my data might be out of date, but the last time I looked at this, the average lifespan has peaked at around 77 years. And this happened, I believe, in 2015, because so much of our population has now less than full lifespans because they die either from problems with primarily either diabetes is number one, or number two is cardiovascular related diseases. So things like when you have high blood pressure for a prolonged period of time, your heart enlarges. It's a muscle. It gets bigger to try and pump the blood through vessels that are narrowed. The reason why they're narrowed is because you have a buildup of cholesterol, and also because your fitness drops. So those two work hand in hand. It's not just one cause. But because of that, your heart needs to get stronger to pump through something that's higher pressure. Like, imagine blowing through a large straw versus a really narrow straw. But at some point, the heart gets too big. Like, it doesn't have a natural off switch. And when it gets so large, it becomes flabby. It becomes inefficient at pumping.
So obviously we need some sort of curative to this, but and I actually agree with you in what you're saying that society would totally fall apart obviously without antibiotics. But just coming back to your original point on Big Pharma.
Yes, so we're dependent on Big Pharma uh, being an industry that is profitable, that is self-sustaining in order to keep producing these drugs. However, we're also dependent on Big Pharma to continue to introduce new drugs to the market, to continue medical research. Because Big Pharma own all the mass manufacturing, um, how do you say?
I think your problem comes down to the research aspect, in that they've got a monopoly on that.
This, they've got a monopoly on.
It's why antipsychotics haven't had work done on them for such a long time.
Yes, exactly. So this naturally creates an environment where conditions that affect a lot of people are more profitable to develop treatments for. So there are many potential drugs being researched all the time in independent universities or research institutes. All of them produce potentials for new research, for potentials for new studies. But the ones that are focused on by the industry are the ones that are treating conditions that are the most profitable to treat. So the largest conditions, diabetes, cancers, because cancers, even though they're not as common, they're very profitable to treat because you can charge whatever you want for a treatment, essentially. And there's conditions that affect a smaller number of people that get ignored. These are these are sometimes called. They use the terminology orphan conditions.
Yeah.
And so there's governments have tried to address this by providing incentives in terms of tax deductions for research and development, or even direct grants for what they
For
call
research into these orphan drugs.
orphan drugs, so that drugs that treat a small number of, like, say, there's a rare birth defect condition. It affects the spinal cord, and I forget the details. But it was an injectable medication, first introduced into the NHS, I believe, in 2018, and it made the papers because one dose of the drug was approved by the NHS at over $1 million, £1 million. And the reason why it was approved to be paid for at £1 million was because the alternative for a child at 2 years old with this essentially what is inherited birth defect that could be treated with surgery, the surgery would cost $2 million on average if you add up all the costs of hospitalization, surgery.
But also the emotional toll on the family, the fact that they're going to have to take time off work. Like, there's just compounding costs when a child is sick. And so, yeah, if you've got a national health service, like, surely that is what it is for.
Yes, but the thing is, this would only affect maybe 5 children a year or something. It was a very, very small population. This would not have ever been produced if not for initial funding, orphan drug funding, supplied in part by
governments.
By governments. Even though now that it was on the market, the profit from those sales, it wasn't being returned back to the government.
Yeah, that's where it doesn't work out, is that the profits always seem to go offshore. But I just want to take you back, like, for a sec. So penicillin is invented. What happens?
So penicillin was discovered from the mold of
Discovered,
citrus.
not invented. Sorry.
No, it was like the mold was discovered that produced something that was antibacterial. This was revolutionary because while bacteria had been discovered, as in the existence of something small enough that you could only see with a microscope, that concept didn't exist before about the 1700s. So by, I believe it was the 1800s, that something that could kill bacteria was discovered. And there was also the idea that bacteria was responsible for disease coming around about that time as well. You could prove that by when people coughed, you put their sputum under a microscope and you see what's in it. So and then you compare it to just normal like spit.
This is just one of Binkus's many hobbies on the weekend.
Yeah, so
Goes out collecting samples.
it was a huge revolution to be able to identify something that, and then the first way that these people could keep creating penicillin was to essentially grow mold on rotting fruit.
So you say it was rotting citrus. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's the mold that naturally grows on lemon peels. If you leave a lemon on the ground, like once it gets really ripe, it'll fall to the ground. You just leave it. It'll eventually shrivel up, and it'll grow like a weird, like fluffy white mold, and then it'll and this mold, it it almost looks like cotton wool, but it's more less dense. This mold is something that survives on the acidic skin peel of a lemon, and it's naturally antibacterial, which is quite remarkable. Um,
Lemon fresh, as
it
they would say.
the mold is produced by a fungus, and the way for the fungus to survive, fungus being another type of microorganism, it competes with bacteria, is the fungus develops a poison to protect itself from being destroyed by bacteria that would otherwise kill the mold.
That's fascinating.
So it's the same way that some trees have leaves that are antibacterial, like the tea tree, eucalyptus trees. And it's in the same fashion.
The acai trees. There was a guy who had a pen full of giraffes, and they only eat acai. And what happened was acacia. Sorry, acacia trees. So what happened was they were out there eating the acacia, and the acacia send through their root networks a message to make all of their leaves poisonous. So that's how that was discovered. That because every one of the giraffes died, and they were like, well, they were eating the thing that they usually eat, and that's why they need such a big roaming area, because otherwise the trees poison them.
That's incredible. So the trees so they produce a poison, but they don't produce it all the time, because that would be very expensive for a tree to keep producing an extra molecule that it didn't need to. But in response to being eaten, it's got like a pain response.
It's got a defense mechanism. There's another one where basically if a caterpillar starts eating the leaves of this particular plant, the plant lets off a pheromone that's very attractive to birds that like that particular type of caterpillar.
And it's so fascinating that these kind of things can evolve.
Yeah, so, but look, I've taken us off track. So we're going back. So the invention of penicillin isn't patented at the time, I believe.
Yes. Now, the actual histories is probably something that I haven't got the details front of mind of, the patent history, because I'm sure it is fascinating. But I imagine that once it became apparent how revolutionary this would be, it also became apparent how profitable it would be to produce this on scale. And so there's a dual history of the ability to make medication, so the ability to first get into the process of farm rotting fruit to collect this fungus that happens to be antibacterial, to get to the point where we are today, where almost all drugs can now be developed synthetically by the raw chemical ingredients, combining them under pressure and temperature with correct catalysts, and creating molecules from scratch. It's an incredible industry that you can actually create something that didn't exist before. It's the closest thing we've ever got to
the God particle.
Essentially, yes. Yeah. Now the difference is we're not doing it on the atomic level, we're doing it on a higher level, but I don't think it's any less incredible, especially when you think about what previous societies had to do. Yeah, they could grow a plant and take its fruit.
I think that's a pretty impressive feat, I have to say.
We can now produce molecules that it used to be that only plants could produce. We are essentially, basically that's what we've done. Now the molecules we produce are nowhere near as intricate as what plants can produce, and cost a lot more for us to produce than using plants to produce. So modern pharmaceutical industry actually also has another development branch at the moment where actually, before I do that, let me take a step back.
All right, so Penicillin is invented, and with it, a whole new industry comes along, one that we are now dependent on.
Yes. So we've reached a point in our, like, I suppose you'd say, industrial development, where only the most efficient like manufacturers of drugs can survive, and being efficient in turn requires them to be very large, and being very large starts to create problems because they get to, when they're very large, they individually control large portions of the market, so collusion becomes possible. Like if you have 100 different companies making products, then they all just try and make the best they can and sell as much as they can. But when you only have three making, say, there's a new drug that's become a media sensation that can treat both diabetes and weight loss.
Ozempic.
Ozempic is one. There's a couple others that are now made by competing companies.
Yeah.
So Ozempic is owned by Novo Nordisk, which is a Swedish company from memory. They've made so much money since the release of Ozempic onto the market that they're affecting the value of the currency in Sweden.
Oh, again, we're seeing, just like the Spanish conquistadors, we're seeing an inflation rise in
Yes.
Europe.
And this is only early days. Like, they actually can't produce enough. There's constant supply shortages lasting months. Like, this is only the surface of how profitable this drug will be.
The problem that I really have with it is, like, can you imagine letting someone die just because you want to fit into a dress size one size smaller, or a dress shirt one size, like one button size smaller?
Now, you can look at it another way. You could say, well, with all this extra cash that Novo Nordisk is acquiring, maybe they'll start to invest in things that are not as profitable, because why not? Like, they've run out of
research, right? So
Yeah.
they've run out of the big guns. Why they're gonna start giving back? That's the story we're gonna hear, right?
Yeah.
It's just like Henry Ford.
Yeah, like eventually he'll decide to, I don't know, what was Henry Ford meant to do? Like
Henry Ford provided the Model T car.
And
So
he was, at the time, he was lauded as inventing the production line, like the idea of having a standard set of parts that people only do one small part of building the car. Other manufacturers were building cars at the time, but at the time they had essentially, people were engineers.
it was much more of a craft, and so
Yeah.
there's a huge. This is a digression, but there was a huge turnover at the the Ford factory, because even though there were incredibly high wages, the job was so monotonous for people who were so highly skilled that they eventually were kind of driven crazy by these things. But what I was more talking about in terms of, is it Nordisk?
Novo. We'll call them Novo.
Novo Disc. Novo. What I was talking about there was the fact that Ford, when he started making profits, wanted to share that out amongst his workers and reduce work week time and stuff like that. And his stockholders took him to court quite promptly after that.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
So he was happy to just increase wages.
Oh, yeah, he was going to increase wages, and his stockholders took him to court, so he ended up, through a bunch of shell companies, buying back 51% so that he had controlling interest, and they couldn't do that to him again.
Now, in almost every large company that exists today, it's unusual for one person to have a controlling interest. Usually it's an entity that has a controlling interest, a board of directors, and boards of directors can still be attacked legally, because as a director of a company, one of your duties is to take actions that are to the benefit of the company, to take profitable actions. And if you were to do something like that today, to say, I'm going to keep everyone's salary the same but cut them down to 3 days per week, there is possible that the investors will say, well, is this something
the product that I bought?
Is this something that the company needs to do? Is this wasteful? And if they determine it to be wasteful, that board member can be, like, their title can be taken away.
Ford literally tried to sell them on the idea that people would be happier with a 5-day work week because they'd have time with their family. He also, I think the big selling point was the 8-hour work shift, which meant he could have 24-hour cycle going, straight up. But yeah, when he made a lot of his choices, he actually said happier workers who want to work harder. And the stockholders were like, we don't give a shit. Give me that money. It's like Goodfellas.
Interesting. And it's precisely because he's running a production line. You don't need happy workers.
Yeah,
However,
no.
if you look at the big tech companies today, to have good software developers, you do need happy workers, and that's why like the stereotype of lavish like buffets and gyms
Like
and
bounce houses and
yeah.
like childish stuff. Yeah, it like creativity is an interesting thing. And if you like, there is a saying that, if you could be half as serious as a child is at play, at anything, then you'd be a success at it. I've butchered the quote, but it's this idea that play is so kind of primal and primitive, like it's just what we do as a species.
But the vast majority of us are not working in creative industries, and the pharmaceutical industry is a production line. It's not creative. So that's something I want people to keep in mind. It's not men and women in like lab coats doing research and making new discoveries. It's people standing around a modern manufacturing plant, observing vials of product and checking percentages to make sure everything runs efficiently. That's it. It's
And just pressing buttons.
and pressing buttons and um, uh, reviewing marketing reports and finding new ways to convince doctors to prescribe their product instead of their competitor's product. These,
But I think what your problem was this is that you I derailed you a little bit with the Henry Ford talk. I think what you're saying is that Novo is not going to reinvest any of this money that it's making from its new kind of anti-fat insulin drug into orphan drugs. It's going to be using that money to fund more and more research into things that are kind of already solved, but the patent will run out eventually, so they're looking 5 or 6 years down the line.
yes, exactly. Like um, most, we've reached the point in the development of in medical development where all the easy pickings have been picked, if that makes sense. It's something that's very hard. Like if someone asks for a source, I can't give you a source, but what I'm telling you is we've reached a point where um, most of the profitable diseases have a treatment. Now, it might not be the perfect treatment, but it's a treatment that's good enough. So that means that for drug companies to continue to bring new products to market, they have to invest in things like Ozempic. Ozempic, it's a biological drug. It's similar to insulin. It's very expensive to produce. It's something that only very large pharmaceutical giants can produce. Now, the reason why that's important is that those that don't have the expertise to do that are trapped making generics. Like the only ones who can compete are the ones who are doing it in India because profit margins are razor thin.
Razor thin,
They're
yeah.
talking about like 3%, like they're making the profit margins of airlines like 3%, 4%. Like manufacturing generics is not a profitable industry. But it's an industry that we depend on.
Well, it's an exploitable industry. The other thing is that what was Ozempic originally designed to treat? Was it just meant to be an alternative to insulin in order that, people with diabetes don't die?
Well, when we say intended, like if you think about how it became a drug, essentially some researchers discovered a receptor in the wall of your intestine, which regulated it reacted to glucagon. Glucagon is, you would say, like
It sounds like a Star Trek character.
it sounds like a Star Trek character. It is essentially it's the opposite of insulin. Insulin drops your blood sugar, glucagon increases your blood sugar. It's but it's just like it's lesser known evil twin, or say for example, it's an intricate
The
part of
one
that.
that has to live in the walls.
Yes, it's an intricate part of control of blood sugar. Um, so they've found this molecule. So they've found essentially they've found a target on the wall of your intestine. Imagine your intestine is a brick wall, or it's a wall of something that's yeah, bricks is a good metaphor. But between those bricks, there's ports. So there's ways you can get in. There's doorways, and one of these doorways responds to glucagon. That's its natural, um, like that's the natural molecule that it reacts to. But it by manipulating that, you can manipulate uh, how much sugar or yeah, how much sugar's from the food that you've eaten and is entering your intestine um, enters your blood, and how much sugar comes out of your blood back into the intestine is thrown away. It's quite remarkable that we've found this because it's a way to control blood sugar without manipulating with your organs directly. It's like a way we're doing it from the outside. It has an incredibly good side effect profile because of that. If you read its side effects, it's things like
Sounds like very biologically friendly. Like it sounds just humanly friendly. It sounds very humanistic in the fact that it's actually like using your body's own natural processes rather than like pushing.
yes. So it's a great invention, and when it was discovered as a potential target for treating diabetes, diabetes is something that is very profitable to treat. So it attracted a lot of funding. It got to the stage of going to human trials, and in human trials, they discovered that the diabetics who are getting, in their double-blind study, the new like Ozempic candidate, were losing weight as well, which is a huge benefit if you're diabetic or even if you're not yet diabetic. And it became apparent that the weight loss aspect was also an interesting market, but they haven't actually reached the point where they're interested in marketing it for weight loss globally. So what's happened is the drug's been released onto the market as a new treatment for diabetes, both for people, and because of the way it works, it's good for people both who are born with diabetes, so they have diabetes type 1, they've depended on insulin their whole life. It's also safe and effective for people who develop diabetes due to metabolic syndrome, just by being unhealthy, but it treats them just as well. And it's as soon as it hit the market, because it's such a safe drug, like its side effect profile is so good, it's been constantly going in and out of stock. However, it's also attracted the attention of people who want methods to lose weight without, or essentially without exercise. Now, the traditional treatments, the traditional weight loss drugs, the weight loss drugs in themselves are not new, but they're all essentially stimulants. They're either and a few of them, being the ones that are more amphetamine based, have been withdrawn from the market. Like they're no longer, like they're banned from sale because they cause heart attacks. Like, so it's a pathway that has reached a dead end. Like at this stage, if
You're trying to lose weight, you might as well just start snorting coke because that's basically what they're providing you with.
that's what's available. So this is, compared to that, this is like you can see suddenly how
It's like cocaine compared to crack, right? Like one's gonna leave you feeling clean, sweet, and free afterwards, and the other one's gonna make your blood itch.
exactly that's how much of an improvement it is. So not only is there not enough supply because only a handful of companies can produce it, and it's something that naturally can't be produced quickly. Not only is there only there is too much demand from people who are diabetic. Now there's people who are wanting it to lose weight, and it's something that drug regulators like the FDA have no ability to stop. The FDA doesn't regulate doctors; it regulates drugs and drug producers and drug marketing. But doctors are independent. They can prescribe whatever they like as long as it's clinically justified. And there is no reason why a doctor shouldn't be allowed to prescribe Ozempic to help someone lose weight. There really isn't. But the problem is that
Surely the first rule of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, is part of that. I mean, to it's like becoming a dry drunk. To fuck with your body like that you haven't let go of any of the emotional attachments or issues or anything else that's involved with why you became like a pig, you know what I mean? And once those are addressed, you'll feel happy in yourself whatever weight you are, you know what I mean? But if you're going around stealing a drug that could be helping children so that you can eat an extra pizza on a Friday night, then you really got to start reassessing your life choices.
And that's the debate that's been had. But that's a debate that's being born out of uh, essentially scarcity. I don't know if the scarcity wasn't there, would you still have the same view? Like if everyone could access
If the scarcity wasn't there and everyone could still access it, yeah, I would still have the same problem. I think that shortcuts, just like that stupid, ab master that used to, people used to strap to their stomachs, and it used to give them a small amount of electric shock so that they would get abs that were absolutely useless. Yeah, no, I would have a huge problem with it. I have a huge problem with kind of plastic surgery as well, as a whole, as a field. If it's not curative and it's just elective surgery and it's not going to actually help the person in any way, like I don't see why you should expose people to the risks of these things.
See, I actually disagree. I think cosmetic surgery and cosmetic drugs, like using this just for weight loss, people should be allowed to do that. Because I believe there is a benefit. Like, if you're
You go for the bodily autonomy argument. I
well,
like that.
no, not body. It's not bodily autonomy. It's if you can improve someone's mental health by improving their physical appearance, then that is a valid treatment. Even if it's vanity driving it, it's still something that improves their life. Like, who are you to say what improvements are worthwhile and what aren't?
Well, what I would say to you is this, is that at this point in time, we do have the scarcity, so we don't have to have the hypothetical, and people are still using it to lose weight, even though it is taking it away from people with diabetes. So trust me, that level of vanity does not need to be fed.
No, that's the problem. So,
And that's the client base.
no. My point is, who's actually? No one is making a conscious. No one is being presented. It's like the trolley problem, but it's the trolley problem where the lever is invisible. No one is making an active decision to deprive someone else of the drug, but the scarcity still remains. Like
You don't have to face the person face to face that you're taking the medication away from, but that doesn't mean that you don't know that someone else could be using it. And if you are, you're being willfully blind. Because, as you say, doctors are prescribing based on their own decision. Like, I would question that doctor's decisions then.
At this stage, you should, because the I believe most of the medical organizations like the AMA have come out with statements saying doctors should prefer to essentially they're not instructing them, they can't force them, but they're recommending strongly that you should prioritize prescribing this to diabetics because there is a shortage and it's actually causing more harm for the market if you don't curtail this behavior. But they can't force anyone to.
I get that they can't force anyone to do anything, and I actually take your point around cosmetic surgery. I do think that adults should be allowed to do whatever they want as long as they can afford to do it. I just don't agree with the doctor side of it, if that makes sense. I don't agree with the provider rather than the purchaser.
Do you think that doctors are being incentivized to essentially not they know people are desperate to lose weight, and if someone calls them up asking for it, they'll find a way to give it to them without like giving them.
This is like Viagra hitting the market again, bro.
Exactly, yeah. So essentially what you're saying is that doctors are being incentivized. This is your concern, that doctors are being incentivized to give this to people whom it might not be safe for, or who might not be.
Right, let me put it this way. Who are the people who are most likely to have a doctor that isn't going to accuse them of doctor shopping? Right? It's rich people, right?
Yes, exactly.
So
Yep.
rich people, to me, therefore are the main consumers of this product
Oh, definitely.
at
It's
this
four
point
hundred
in
dollars a
time.
month at least. Yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
So for me, that's again where the issue arises. They've driven the market price up through the roof, and this is something that could actually save people. And it's so indicative of us that we use it for vanity instead. That we try and clutch onto like some semblance of being attractive rather than being spiritually whole.
It's something that ties into well, it permeated every aspect of our society. Look at how we treat the elderly. Like there was a time when our elders were, well, that was the time of your life you retired. That was the time of your life you spent in the communal plaza, like being respected by your community. Now it's the time when you're shuffled off into a
Into the
unhygienic
grey room.
into an unhygienic like small room somewhere outside of the city where you don't bother no one, and we find someone to underpay to give you your basic medical care, and you're essentially left isolated and alone. Like it's the society has like that's not a society anymore. What we have now is we have a civilization. Uh, we have common living spaces. We don't have a society anymore. It's like the what's
That's not what the Joker told me.
well, the Joker just decided that society is what it like the situation just is like that's what is society. So they've decided to like redefine society as what is actually happening rather than live in a utopian view, live in a practical view. He was a very practical man.
Just introduce a little chaos.
He no, you gave me the analogy the other day of who was it? Was it who was the Macedonian that cut through the knot?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. So the Joker is like an Alexander the Great. He
For
gets
our
to the
times,
point.
he gets through the he cuts straight through the Jordanian knot. I'm sure that Alexander the Great, when you meet him in the afterlife, will be very pleased that you compared him to someone deranged like that. Once the two of you meet in Valhalla,
Well, I mean, he's obviously missing a few pieces that would make him an excellent leader because what Alexander the Great achieved was incredible. Like to be able to take an empire through to the steppes of India and challenge empire you'd never even seen before. Like that's something I don't think has ever been repeated.
but not only that, have you ever heard his speech when his crew decided to try and mutiny against him? And he's like, my father took you from like a bunch of like tribal animals basically and formed you into a city state. He goes, I gave you an empire. And like, he just, like, this speech killed it. Like, it killed the mutiny in its steps.
Well, that's incredible. We should bring that up one day. We should have it. Or if we can link it.
Yeah, we can link it.
Hmm.
But you got to remind me to link it.
Cool.
All right. So what I want to know is this: is so we go from not having any kind of pharmaceutical products, then we find out, yes, that it's going to be profitable. I imagine initially through like snake oil salesmen or people who sold like concoctions, like cure-alls. Like Coca-Cola was sold as one at one point. So was like tomato sauce was sold as like an apothecary's delight.
Oh no, there was always traveling salesmen, but at the same time, there was an industry of uh well, what we call today the pharmacists. But the like yeah, those two industries developed side by side. There wasn't one or the other. There was establishments that dabbled in like tried and true traditional medicine that was known to have some effect, and there was establishments that were trying to sell you the next big thing.
Like, but you see, cocaine did actually cure what ails you when it had coke in it. So the,
That's it. And cocaine is cocaine is a legitimate drug that has medical benefits. It's
well,
no
you've
longer used.
talked about how much better it is for you in the dental process.
There is, well, yes. One thing I'll point out is there still exists, um, and it's used today. Eye drops made with an ingredient of cocaine. Cocaine both constricts blood vessels and stops pain at the same time. It is the perfect treatment for an acute wound. Like if you get shot, um, now they use adrenaline in a syringe. But if you don't have access to the technology to produce syringes, which is something that's incredibly difficult to do without modern technology, then having cocaine powder and rubbing that into a wound achieves something even more effective. Not only does it
It vascular constricts.
it makes it slows the bleeding by vascular constriction. It has the effect of adrenaline to keep you alert and stop you from passing out by increasing your blood pressure. So when you lose blood, your blood pressure naturally drops too much, you pass out. So it opposes that by increasing your blood pressure at the same time as stopping the bleeding, at the same time as stopping the pain. It actually targets three different paths of what the injury is doing to you. So
Yeah, as you say, wunderbar.
yes, it is. So yeah, it is essentially an excellent snake oil treatment, and it's not surprising that eventually a company that made soft drinks decided to just add it to their soft drink.
But see, to me, like these apothecaries and these traditional medicines have existed for a long, long time, and much longer than the pharmaceutical industry. And it's only, again, with the birth of penicillin and this idea of an like bacterial, that we enter this modern age of like chemistry or kind of scientific mindedness, where we don't question anymore. We just take whatever the pill is.
So what's happened between then and now is that the complexity essentially of how drugs works has exploded exponentially. So penicillin treats bacteria. It doesn't treat all bacteria. It treats a handful of specific types of bacteria. And the bacteria themselves respond to the poison of penicillin by developing ways to either neutralize its effect or to essentially take the molecule and throw it back out of its body again. That's essentially what they're doing. They've developed resistance. And the fascinating thing about bacteria is that if one bacteria spontaneously develops resistance and it lives in it will, when it reproduces, and bacteria reproduce very quickly, very commonly, its children will have that immunity too. But not only that, it can also transfer that resistance to adjacent bacteria. So not only is it spreading its resistance through just growth,
it's spreading it through contagion as well.
Yes, through contagion as well. And that's something that's not been known for a long time. So that means antibiotic resistance can develop in... So what I'm saying is, if one type of bacteria becomes resistant and you happen to be infected with two different types of bacteria, a second type of bacteria that wasn't resistant before
will become resistant.
Yes. So more and more, and different types of bacteria are more resistant to different types of... and so that's why, penicillin on its own is no longer an effective treatment. We've had to develop a whole suite of first different types of penicillin. So we've learned how to modify the molecule so that it gets around. Essentially, the way the resistance of the bacteria works is that they recognize the penicillin molecule, and the same way the doorway works into the gut to let in and out sugars, the bacteria have a doorway that recognizes the penicillin, grabs onto it, and pushes it out the other side. So it's you can imagine something with a hand inside the cell, reaching from this wall in, picking it up, and then throwing it out. So if you make it unrecognizable by changing the structure of the penicillin, then that doesn't work.
Yeah, they're not going to throw it out.
They're not going to throw it out anymore. But then, of course, bacteria develop new ways.
They learn.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's this constant ongoing back and forth process.
Something that is concerning, which probably could be its own topic, is that we're reaching, and it will be reached eventually, there are bacteria now that are resistant to almost every antibiotic that exists. And
this is because of all of you people who don't finish your courses of antibiotics.
That's not the only reason. And I would even argue that might not even be the source of the resistance. Now, the reason I say that is, yes, if you don't finish your course of antibiotics, well, first let me explain why that is likely to lead to resistance. You've given your body a treatment that kills bacteria, but which bacteria does it kill? Of the ones that it's killing the weakest by definition. The ones that are the weakest will die first. If you kill 95% of them, you'll feel healthy again. because most of your disease is gone. However, the ones that remain, because you've finished your course early, you've left 5% alive. Those that remain are, by definition, the stronger ones. They might be stronger just by chance, or they may be stronger because they're resistant to penicillin. So every time you don't finish a course, there's a chance that you're selecting for the ones that are resistant to penicillin. And then when it comes back the second time, you've not only created a resistant bacteria, but every time you cough on someone else, there's a risk that they'll mix that with something else, and you'll be spreading antibiotic resistance to other diseases. So you're exacerbating the problem. Now, the reason I say that's not the main cause is because I don't believe the main cause is people not finishing their drug courses. The main cause is how antibiotics are used relatively indiscriminately in animal husbandry. Antibiotics are given to cattle, milk cattle, cows, I guess. It's given to them as like normal part of their like diet because it essentially farming cows for milk. There's such a high rate of getting infections in the udders that, and especially when you're using machines to like extract the milk, they get they're abrasive. They're living in close quarters.
We've basically driven them insane, and we're giving them something to supplement that.
Oh, they're living in unhygienic conditions. They're not living on fresh grass, roaming fields like they would if they were like a wild animal. You're forcing them into paddocks where they stand in mud all day. The ground is full of fungus. It naturally is. That's what lives in the dirt. So they're collecting infections through their hooves. They're also kicking up mud on their udders. Their udders are always moist and warm. So they're breeding grounds of bacteria.
That they're always moist and warm?
Because that's...
Why are you always touching... Is that why you always ask me to pull over whenever we see a cow?
Well, of course they're moist and warm because it's something that's producing a warm liquid. It's...
I see. The milk comes out warm, does it?
It does. And so...
Is it tasty or warm?
So it's something that's always going to be prone to infection. Now, naturally, if they were feeding their calf, the calf would drink most of the milk, but their saliva would probably kill off that bacteria. But because they don't have calves, they're taken away at like a few weeks old so that they can spend their long lactation period essentially making the product that they were born for. They have to be given something else to prevent them getting infections, and so they're fed antibiotics. So if you're constantly feeding them antibiotics, and they don't feed them one antibiotic, they feed them a group of antibiotics and antifungals. Because if a cow dies, not only do you lose one cow, you've got a diseased cow on your farm that's spreading disease to other cows, which will also make them die.
Yeah.
So you can't risk it. And your livelihood is dependent on it. So to suggest that...
So just do that. Yeah. Just inject all of the cows with it, and then after that, let them fight all of the methane into the air, destroy the ozone layer. Cows seems like a lot of problems, and I don't like the fact that you used moist when you talked about their udders, because that implies that you've done some sort of touchery.
No touchery. Why wouldn't they be moist? They produce a liquid. I'm just extrapolating.
You produce liquids. You're not moist.
Well, aren't people's like skin like a bit more oily than the couch they're sitting on? I mean, that's normal.
Depends on the couch, and you produce a lot of oils because of your mixed background.
My background, my challenges on the street, where I came from, didn't produce my oils.
Yeah, you came from the school of hard knocks, but you made your own oils, ambergris and pears.
What's ambergris?
Ambergris is what they used to make perfume base out of, but it comes from sperm whales, and you have to kill them to get it.
Oh, this is something that, yes, I've heard of this. It's produced from the bile.
Yeah.
And sperm whales are giant whales. They have big like gallbladders. Yeah. So yeah, you just get one sperm whale and you have enough ambergris to make like hundreds of perfume bottles. It's quite fascinating, the first perfumes.
Yeah, I mean, and who needs whales, right? When was the last time a whale did something for you?
Well, I mean, they're like giant cattle. Like, surely they're the next target for farming.
I hope so.
I mean,
It certainly worked out in that Blackfish documentary when they locked that like orca up. And I know that orcas are a type of dolphin, but anyway, I just don't think it's a good idea to try and lock huge animals up in small spaces. It seems to make them go psychotic, just like that chimp that lived with that woman who ripped her friend's face off.
Yeah, I remember seeing that documentary, and then they made a specific point to go back and interview, essentially, orcas that are used in like theme parks. Now you've seen the film, but maybe not all of our audience has. Orcas in theme parks, well, it's too expensive to and it's too difficult to have breeding whales in a theme park because whales won't breed in small enclosures. So the source of whales, in the same way that the source for elephants that people happily ride on in Thailand, is that they're stolen from the wild. So they go out into the wild and they steal infants from their families. And now you might before you accuse me of putting human language onto baby animals, the people they interviewed were the people that captured these whales, and the one of the men who was in charge of the expedition went into quite some detail how when they would capture a calf, the mother of the calf that they would capture wouldn't continue with the pod. It would follow the boat, and it would follow the boat for days. It would go without food, and it would cry. It would cry audibly, loudly. The rest of the pod wouldn't abandon the mother either, but they would huddle in a distance, both because they were afraid of humans, but they also wanted to be close enough to the mother in case they needed help. So intense familial bonds, and they've proven that whales
Have their own language. Each pod has its own
each
language.
pod has a language, and the part of the brain of a whale that controls emotion, because whales are mammals, their brains are remarkably similar to our own. We can compare them directly. Now, of course, its brain is bigger because it's got a bigger head. But if its brain was the same size as ours, the part of the brain that controls emotion is more than twice the size of humans.
But is that true? Head size isn't necessarily proportional to brain size. I'm sure that there's some animals out there that have got big heads, but like just like a tiny nut in their brain.
It is, but it generally is proportional. So, like, no bird can have a giant brain because it's a bird. It's got a small head.
Well, also owls turn their head 360 because the width of their eyes takes up too much like space in their head for their brain to exist there as well, without them being able to turn 180.
And so it used to be um, very difficult to rationalize the two things that, when people were first thinking about what makes humans unique, one of the first avenues they went down is that even though humans aren't the biggest animal, like it was always dependent on, oh, bigger brains must mean better. But then how would they explain humans? Well, they would say, well, it's not the size of the brain that matters, it's the ratio of the brain to the body. And so they would talk about how humans had big heads for their body, but even that, I don't think is the answer. So then they've moved on to, it's the amount of folds in your brain that define how intelligent
Yeah, that's
you
the
are.
one that I've heard.
That's probably where we're at now, but probably even that is limiting. I think the next stage would be how many like neurons you have per like square centimeter of brain matter. And
I
that's
would say that EQ is just more important. Like all of this stuff that we talk about, the whale pods, they have their own languages because they stay with each other for life. They cried because they lost a member of their family. You know what I mean? They don't fuck around like us. They are very serious about what they do, you know what I mean? And it's all about like elephants are known for having revenge attacks on poachers like villages because they know that that village killed one of their like friends, so one of their family members. So I think that animals are not like below or violence. Like they will use it like if you antagonize them, and that's what happened in Blackfish, the documentary. At SeaWorld, this calf that they'd trained up called Tillicum ended up killing quite a few people, and it was covered up for a while. And the other thing you should know is that dolphins and killer whales commit suicides, and quite a few of those did commit suicide. They just dropped.
Yeah, so at some point you have to, like, I know some people are of the view that, like, why shouldn't we, use animals for meat? I'm not going to be a vegan, etc. But at some point you have to realize that some animals, doesn't matter what your views are on eating meat, some animals are just as intelligent as humans are, and how you define that maybe can't do maths, but if its emotions are as real as yours, if not more so, if not more intelligent in that aspect than humans are, which you can guess at, then surely what that we're doing is cruel. Like, and it's
Oh yeah.
even more cruel than it would be to do to a human if you want to measure it that way.
Well, I derailed you, but you were saying that the part of their brain that measures kind of.
That's responsible for well, that in humans we know is responsible for um emotion. It's the higher center of the brain. It's the front of the brain, the cortex. It's oversized in whales, and you can see that in the picture of a whale's brain. It's like its brain is round like ours. It's got two lobes, but the front of its brain is elongated. It's like
That's
it's got a huge.
amazing.
It's essentially got a giant forehead, but it's inside its skull.
No, but that's amazing because not every, but a lot of serial killers have had frontal lobe injury because it's responsible. And Phineas Gage, the guy who got Phineas Gage was a man who was tamping railroad spikes, and one of them impaled him through the head and took out his entire frontal lobe, but he lived and became somewhat of a medical oddity and all-round unpleasant person, apparently. However,
Yeah, and before that, he was like an upstanding member of the community. He had a loving wife. He was known by his workmates as like someone dependable, intelligent, hardworking. And after that, he was like he started
he
like
was a drifter. He started fights. He didn't have any ambition left. It's the part of the brain that like is responsible for that kind of planning and for empathy. So it means that you're not in a perpetual present. And so if those are elongated, like,
it's
can
the
you
opposite.
imagine?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the same thing with octopus. Octopus have neurons throughout their body. Instead of just having a brain, they have that spread throughout their limbs. Like a detached octopus arm or leg, whichever you want to call it, will try and feed where its beak is. It will run away and like try and feed where its beak is supposed to be.
yeah. See the what that tells me is that I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that tells me. That tells me that the consciousness part of their brain, the part of their brain that decides where its body goes, is decentralized essentially.
Yeah.
Like it may not have a single
No,
consciousness.
no, it doesn't have. It's not a centralized. It's not centralized like that. And instead of having a dominant hand, they have dominant eye. They got two identical twins to dress up, and one of them would give it a treat that it liked, and one of them would brush it with a brush it really didn't like. One trial, that was all it took, and then it came out of the water. They looked identical for the one that gave it the treat, and then for the one with the brush, it retreated and spat water at him as hard as it could before either item had been revealed.
So it
So
took one go for it to. It was intelligent enough to. Well, you're saying several things. One is that it it has
single trial learning.
yeah, it's intelligent enough to learn through one action. It's got the thinking ability that it can see something and recognize like unique details um, as accurately, if not more accurately, than a human. Um, and and it's got emotion. It's got an emotional response, and it's also decentralized. That's the fascinating thing. It doesn't have. It's like an ant's nest. Like the ant's nest achieves things as a group, but each individual ant maybe doesn't have a consciousness, but it somehow developed a consciousness when it's come together. That you know, a swarm
It's
of
a hive
insects.
mind.
It's a hive mind, but it's a hive mind that's developed to the point of consciousness, which I don't think exists. Like you can't say the same for insects. I don't think.
No, I wouldn't say so necessarily. But maybe bees, maybe certain insects. You know what I mean? Bees do quite complicated dances. They have their own routines. They like to get drunk. They have bodyguards. You know,
Mm.
if the bee get this is something that I learnt from Mr. Ricky Gervais, that bees will sting other bees to death if they think that they're too drunk to kind of come into the hive.
So essentially, if they think they're diseased,
Yeah,
they will kill them for the safety of
of the rest
themselves
of the tribe,
and the rest. Yeah.
like an invasive bacteria.
Hmm.
Going back to your point on that.
Yeah. Explain, apart from the valuable work that pharmaceutical companies do, what kind of work they do to maximize their profits. So their profits are tied to their ownership of revenue streams, of patents over particular drugs. Once those patents expire, the market landscape immediately changes, and there's very quickly 8 to 10 competitors on the market. And this usually happens within days of the patent expiring because their competitors making generics in India and other countries, but mainly India, are already making like generics before the patent expires because they just don't respect the patent laws in India. They just
Yeah,
don't.
can I ask you, do you think that that's ethical to have that kind of restriction?
Is it ethical to have that kind of restriction? It's a difficult question because if there was no restriction, then there's like like the how do you say?
You would say that there's no incentive, but people who have family members who are ill, or I really don't think that money is the motivating factor that people think that it is. I think that if you give people a comfortable and a secure life, that they are likely to come up with some, you know, brilliant ideas. But right now, I think everything feels slightly precarious, and I guess that ties back into the fact that so many people are taking so many medications.
Now the problem with that now, like I generally agree, but the problem it comes into is that to take a drug from like something that a university lab has discovered into a drug on the market, there's about $1 billion worth of costs. That's not going to be funded by like philanthropic.
How much money did we spend on war again last year, or the war memorial?
Yes, I'm not saying it's impossible. You're right. The War Memorial in Australia has recently been approved for a refurbishment upgrade. They're getting new steps, and I'm sure some other things. That does like downplay it a little bit, but not as much as you'd think. And it's going to cost about $500 million, so $500 million.
So, to take it to market to actually look after the citizenry, which is our health department's job, we could fund all of these kinds of
Well,
things.
that's the issue. It's whose health department? Should the US pay for it? And then as soon as the product hits the market, companies in India can start producing generics. Like, that's the problem. It's something that no one government can ever agree to. You would need all governments to agree to and maybe put in a small proportion. Like, you'd have to have a fund where good candidates would be chosen from, like, universities would apply with grants in the same way that people apply to have their like research published in a journal. They would apply to have their research turned into something productive. They would be given grants, and the grants would come from, say, if the USA has 300 odd million people, it would say, well, we're willing to pay this much because we think that our population would use this percentage. And these things would be like there would be an understanding between. Now it wouldn't be every country because it's just not practical, but at least the countries that would likely purchase these drugs anyway. The G7, the G20, probably the G20 would be a good way to do it.
Can you do me a favor? Just have a look and see if insulin was patented, and have a look and see when and why. Just have a look at who the creator of insulin was, because I think you'll be surprised at the fact that he never intended for it to be a money-making endeavor. He really just wanted some help. Again, the world-class kind of, and I've mentioned it before, stroke treatment plan comes from Roald Dahl and his treatment with his wife. So the guy who invented like or discovered, penicillin didn't patent it either. It was not, again, these were not money making ventures. Like, if we lived in a world where Nikola Tesla had won out over Thomas Edison, like, things probably would be better. But then again, he did end up talking to pigeons when he was, in his final years.
And that's the other problem. Like this number that I've pulled out saying it cost $1 billion. That's a number that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, an industry that is incentivized to make its costs as high as
As high as
possible
possible.
because it's
Yeah.
a tax write-off.
Yeah.
Like it's like that's for no other reason. Like they don't have to have nefarious reasons for it. They just want to minimize their taxes. So they're going to find every accounting method possible to make the
To
research and
add the
development.
expenses
Yeah.
without actually having to
It,
expend them,
yes.
really. So it's kind of like padding the budget of an Sandler film, I hope.
So the inventor of insulin, Frederick Banting, Charles Best, and James Collip, so three inventors in 1923, sold the patent to insulin to the University of Toronto for $1 each. So they did not intend to earn a profit from the discovery to ensure insulin could be widely available to those who needed it. The University of Toronto then gave pharmaceutical companies the right to manufacture insulin and patent any improvements, which was a strategic move to promote competition and prevent a monopoly, ensuring the medication remained accessible.
Is there really a problem with there being a monopoly on a drug that saves people's lives? Like, there's different manufacturers, yeah, of the same generic.
No, so what they were worried about was that if they owned the patent to all products, even if there was improvements, then most companies would drop out of bothering to do any research and development. Eventually, they would just always make the one product, and they would keep competing until one company remained. So they
So
saw
it just keeps coming back to corporate interest, basically.
they were looking 20, 30 years into the future when there's only one manufacturer of insulin in the world because it cost a lot of money to make insulin. Even back then, they recognized that making a biological product was expensive, but it it costs a lot. But if there's two companies making it, they push the margin so low that there's no money in it. So they compete each other until one of them goes bankrupt.
But it still wasn't the intention of the people who, discovered it or invented it to actually make a profit off of it. And I keep coming back to the fact that profit incentive works for people who are like slightly sociopathic, yeah, but it's about finding kind of a fulfillment, I believe. And I do think that this idea of like patenting something that saves people's lives is rather ridiculous.
So I I have a more I agree with you, but I wouldn't go that far. I believe they deserve to have patents, but they deserve to have a fair period where they have a patent, like enough to cover, like enough time that they can get a reasonable return on their investment. And I think they deserve to make a profit. I just don't think they deserve to abuse the patent system.
I think that they should be incentivized with ROI, and they should be incentivized to bring back the industry to their own shores, because since they became a service-based economy, America has become a big, really, problem.
So what you're saying is if a country grants a patent, they could find a way to tie that to making sure that production of, like if you want a patent on X new like blockbuster drug, you must manufacture it locally. Like I don't see why that's impossible. That's a very good idea.
I think that that's what you should do. You have to manufacture it locally. It gets sold overseas at a comparable price. And at the end of the day, there's not a patent on it. So those people that are making it overseas and selling it overseas are selling it at a comparable price in terms of actual percentage range.
Well, they would naturally, but how dare you not like ensure that your drug companies are able to become multi-trillionaires?
I guess what I'm suggesting is that, like, for most people who make these discoveries,
Yeah.
altruism seems to be the actual cause. It doesn't ever seem to really be to make billions of dollars. Like Alan Turing, who it basically invented the computers, didn't do it to make billions. He did it to protect his country. You know what I mean?
So the fundamental issue, and this is something that I was going about in a roundabout way as well. I think you've pointed out, or you probably have, but what I'm going to land on is that the pharmaceutical industry does both manufacture, like it's a factory, and it's also involved in drug research, and that's what needs to be broken.
Yeah,
If
there needs to be it needs to be broken because at the end of the day they don't see incentive in any research, and biological devices and things like that are a bit of a concern when it comes to like the future. Can someone suddenly hack into that insulin device and deny you your insulin for the day? Do you know what I mean? Like, the more that you introduce complicated things into our infrastructure, the more weight is put on like everyone. It's not dispersed equally either.
so, we are talking about patents earlier, and I wanted to point out ways that the pharmaceutical industry extends patents that I think most people probably would take issue with. So these are all fall under the umbrella of evergreening strategies. Evergreening is a concept that a patent normally has a life of about 20 years. And just like a tree, when it dies, it turns brown. If you were to keep it green, you would make it live longer. So they do this by making new formulations. Now, in some cases, a new formulation of a drug, well, when I say formulation, formulation is
Can I put it maybe in terms that people might understand it a bit more simply?
mhm.
Recently, there was a controversy around the fact that they were changing Roald Dahl's books around, and the whole excuse given was that he's a racist. However, by changing the text, they fundamentally own a new copyright to that edition of the work, so it can't enter the public domain.
Exactly. That's an excellent analogy. And crucially, the work isn't actually any different. All they've done is changed a few odd words here and there.
The
They've
substance of the text is not changed. It's just, I mean, arguably for me it is, but the substance of the medication in this case, or the what it provokes in its recipient, is the same.
that's a traditional way that they create a new patent. They actually create a new drug that is essentially the same as the old drug. They've done trials on multiple different variations of it, and they realize it's basically just as good, but maybe it's has 5% more effect. So when they discover these, they keep them on the back burner. They file away the research. They wait until the patent on their first drug is nearing expiry, so maybe at year 15, and then they'll start trying to seek approval for their second drug. Um, and if they don't do it, their competitors often do. Competitors also use this as a strategy to compete. So they see like company A has made this new blockbuster drug. It's got a patent, but just because they have a patent doesn't mean they can't work out how to make it. They can make it, they're just not allowed to sell it. So they modify it slightly, and it's often their competition who make the analog, the drug B. That's very similar. But what drug company A can do to protect its own patent is also change the filler ingredients. So some drugs have a coating called an enteric coating that protects against damage when it goes through the gut. They can change that into a pellet formulation, and a pellet formulation, it's absorbed faster. Because it's absorbed faster, they can get a patent on a new dosage form because it works differently, and that's patentable as well. I'm not sure if it's for the full amount of time, but it's still patentable. Another thing they can do, though, which is has less connection to like a genuine improvement, is to make modifications to the structure that are, well, there was one example, and it's a drug called Coversil. It's a blood pressure medication, and the company that made it discovered that if you were to change what they call the salt form, so I won't get into the technical details, but essentially all drugs are bound to common minerals, and that's how they become a solid. It's a principle of chemistry that nothing can be a solid on like as a free molecule. So they bound it originally to one protein, and during their like internal research, they found that if they used a different protein, it was absorbed slightly more quickly, like about 10% faster. And they managed to get a patent on this other salt form as a separate drug. Why would you bother? This is expensive. It's a waste of time and money to change a formulation. What they did actually They got the patent on the second one. They lost the patent on the first product, but that didn't matter. They just discontinued it from the market, and they started producing the second one. And they managed to keep their market by going to all their prescribers of the first drug and tell them this is the new formulation. Instead of prescribing the old formulation, you must prescribe this one. They just told them, we are discontinuing the old formulation, so your prescriptions for the old formulation are no longer valid.
It's like, yeah, you just get new Coke now.
Exactly. That is exactly how it turned out. Now, what they did was the salt forms have different weight, and so that's what the milligram of drug is. It's how much drug is in there. But the different weights, when you digest them and you break it apart, ends up being equivalent in effect. So, in the old drug, about 4 milligrams required with the new salt form 5 milligrams to be equivalent. And they sold exactly that. They discontinued the 4 milligram packet and they made a 5 milligram packet. So one tablet had exactly the same effect. It was blatant. Like they were trying to make
it was just very clear.
And so they went to they educated all their like prescribing base with their, paid pharma reps to go everywhere and tell their doctors, stop prescribing Coversil 4 milligram. We've improved the formulation. You need to prescribe 5 milligram now, and we are discontinuing 4 milligram. And they did this like 1 or 2 years before the patent expired. So they gave that up. So if the doctors didn't change them over, it would disrupt the patient's treatment. So they just changed them over without too much fuss. Both of them were on patent. They were the same price. But once the patent did finally end on the original 4 milligram, generics started coming to the market. But generics came to a market where patients were either on the 5 milligram or they're on a completely different medication. And those generics took a very long time to pick up new patients.
People are very brand loyal. Like that's the thing. They don't care if it's the same composition, if it's the exact same thing, if it's in a different package. They don't like it.
Oh, it's beyond that. Like it's when it comes to medication, and it's the same price, or it's within $1 or $2 or even $10 difference. People, it's brand loyalty plus it's most people don't understand medication. They're fearful,
so they think it's prestige that this one's safer than the one it's one of the health is one of the biggest expenditures out there.
Well, yeah,
just get the generic.
I wouldn't put it to like wanting prestige. I'd put it more to just being afraid of change, like just not having faith that the generic is as good. Now, what I will tell people is that not only do they have to, when they release a generic and to be able to claim that it's equivalent, not only do they prove that it has the same amount as the original, they have to prove that it's released at roughly the same rate. That's something that's not done for food. It's not the same as Coke and like off-brand Coke. It has to be identical. Imagine if someone said, this is off-brand Coke. It's made with the same formula as Coke. It tastes the same as Coke. We've tested it to make sure it tastes the same as Coke.
But it has 15 times the caffeine.
And it has the same amount of caffeine, but it's 30% cheaper. Do you want the off-brand? And you still say no. That's what people are saying at this stage.
Oh, yeah. Currently, like, that's what you are saying. Like, it don't go for the name brand with drugs. You're just doing yourself a disservice. If there's one piece of little advice I can give.
Now, I'm sure many people are probably considering that already with cost of living crisis. But before we get off track on cost of living crisis, I'll talk about something else that they do. So apart from creating a new salt form, so it's clearly the same drug. They haven't even bothered to make a different drug molecule.
Yeah, they've just bonded it to a different solid.
Another method that's very similar is drugs sometimes have chirality. Chirality is any molecule that is not cannot be cut in half to make two, and each half is a mirror image of each other. So something like your hand. If you look at your left hand,
it's a chiral of the right.
It's a chiral of the right. That's the best explanation I can give. It's you can't turn your left hand in any orientation where it looks exactly the same as your right hand. You can put them next to each other and your thumbs will be on the same side, but then your hands will be facing opposite directions. You turn your hand the other way around and then your thumbs will be in the wrong side. So they're always different they're always a mirror image of each other. It doesn't matter how you orient it. And any molecule that has that, like it's like odd shaped, will have chirality. What they've discovered is that in many drugs, the different chiral mirror images have different effects. So drug companies have taken to, when they recognize this, waiting till about year 15 of their patent, recognizing which of the two mirror images is the one that's more active than the other. It doesn't have to be like, it really doesn't matter how active they are in principle. I want to point this out. Like, say mirror image left hand side was 30% absorbed and the right hand side was 60% absorbed. That doesn't mean the left hand side is like worse. It just means you need more of it to have the same effect. That's not a problem. But what they do is they split it. They say the right hand side mirror image is more active, so more absorbed. So we'll make that into its own new drug. We'll get a patent on that, and we'll do what I said in like the previous example. They'll discontinue the old mirror image, and because it's discontinued, everyone switches to the new one. Then when generics come out, they can legitimately say, well, our one is better absorbed, it's superior.
Yeah.
Even though if you just took more of the generic, it would still have identical biological effect. Like, it's biologically the same, but they can still claim in marketing that it's absorbed better. Or and
It's all about a facade, and I really do think that going back to what we were talking about paranoia, like I do think that this failure of institutions to be held to account, or like there was no thalidomide payouts after that happened, were there?
so the story of thalidomide.
It was given to women who were experiencing morning sickness. East Germany discovered that it would cause birth defects, but no one wanted to listen to East Germany because they were communists. And so a whole bunch of children were born with these birth defects, and I'm pretty sure that Johnson and Johnson has not paid a single cent to anyone.
Oh, that bit I'm not sure about at all. I had no idea that there was like a payout that wasn't paid. I
I
know
don't
that,
think that there was ever a payout. I don't think that I think that they just litigated it into the ground.
and the issue just was brushed away.
Well, I would just Google were there any payouts for thalidomide babies, because again, it sets a precedent. It sets, like, how many people had talc and then got asbestos poisoning.
From Johnson and Johnson, who has a plaque in their foyer, from the original founders, that details how they are a moral company. Actually, let me bring that up. I don't think most people realize this. Johnson and Johnson have a huge stick up their ass.
I can understand. Like, honestly, if your whole life is like making no tears baby formula, it's not like you're used to sticking up for yourself. You know what I mean? Like, that's your main your main competitor's infants and their eyeballs. Anyway, I think that when it comes down to it, the real issue that both of us have is that, as usual, it's the people who are in the minority cases that get left behind. And those orphan drugs that we talked about before are what puts them in a position like that.
Yes, so part of the problem with the pharmaceutical companies being like responsible implicitly for our research and development of drugs is that we've allowed them to get away with this kind of behavior uh, because they provide us a valuable service in the terms of getting drugs on the market. If we were to take that and and do something like I was suggesting before, uh, you know, an create a fund that would be used to take prospective research and turn it into drugs, and then allow drug companies to just bid for the rights to manufacture and take the profit from um, from selling the product of that manufacture. And it wouldn't be anywhere near the kind of profiteering possible today. Like, if you're bidding for
But
10.
force them to manufacture, to force them to nationalize. Like, I don't like the idea that someone is getting like screwed so that someone else's mental health is slightly improved.
Oh no, I wouldn't put it that way. I would put it the way that say the way countries privatize the running of their rail network, but they don't sell the rights. They don't actually sell the rail network. So they contract out to private companies to run trains, to provide drivers, to do the HR, to the hiring, the firing, the
To do all
operation.
of the work, but they
Yeah,
maintain control.
but they
Yeah.
maintain ownership of the rail, so that and because it's they maintain ownership, they just renew contracts, and every 5 years they just put out a new tender. Like the company A that runs the trains can continue, but if company B says, well, we'll do it for a better rate, we're more efficient, we're not going to like take as much profit, whatever, then things can remain in government ownership but run like a private company. And the rail network of the state of Victoria runs like that. uh,
That's yeah. I can see that being a really like an even-handed solution.
the rail network of New South Wales rather is run in the government, and there's a stark difference in, well, the biggest difference I've noticed is that the New South Wales rail network
A,
used to be cleaner.
a
Like
lot more junkies.
no, like they actually spent more time cleaning, but that's fallen off because I think they've started to cut back to, like, this was years ago. This is something I noticed
It's
maybe 20 years
basically
ago.
skeleton staff now. They
Yeah,
have two guys come through to check tickets and to get your food order, and then they've got someone working behind the canteen, and then they've got the engine driver, basically.
yeah. So essentially, what's happened is what they used to do as a public service, which was to staff the rail network appropriately and give it funding to be the best it could be. Now, successive state governments have, you know, run into budget overspends. They've given too many tax cuts to businesses, and so they've run out of money, and so they start cutting funding
To public
to
services.
public services and just say deal with it, and they do the best they can, and they start not having as much cleaning, not having
But
as
again,
much.
they do it out of altruism. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, oh God, this idea of a representative kind of force that takes care of us benevolently
So
in the
Johnson and Johnson has a credo. It's engraved onto marble in their foyer.
yeah.
Um, and I'm looking at their website. These are 8 fun facts about the Johnson and Johnson credo. Our credo stems from the belief that consumers, employees, and the community are all equally important.
I noticed that they didn't mention. I noticed that they didn't mention upper management or any kind of executive at their own offices. They just said employees, community, and whatever the last one was, drug addicts.
Um, consumers, employees, and the community. Now,
Consumers, employer, community.
before I continue, I'll point out that it's quite possible that the original Johnson and Johnson were very altruistic and were trying to make, they were trying to be rich capitalists, but actually have morality in business. So I don't think it's fair to paint them as completely
Yeah, it's like the
bankrupt.
McDonald's brothers.
However, what I will say is that it's a bankrupt company today because those people aren't running it anymore. They're dead, and their views are only being given lip service. So I want to make that distinction. I'm not disparaging dead people.
Just in case they come back to get you. Like, here, have some asbestos in your face.
Oh, no. The point is that what they did, because they wrote this in 1935, they actually did.
No,
Like
I know
something
that
was...
Johnson and Johnson did a lot of good work. Do
Yeah.
you know that Kellogg's invented the cornflakes as a douche because he hated the idea of women getting pleasure from sex?
I heard that they that cornflakes cured masturbation.
Yeah, that's what it was. But it was by shoving it straight up your clacker. Gave it a bit of a rough feeling.
I saw a comment. No, I saw an explanation that said that he promoted it to stop the feelings because it was bland and like tasteless. It would stop the like urge to masturbate, and this is why you should eat it. Like I've heard it put that way. I didn't know about the other way.
No, it's the Kellogg's douche, man.
Anyway, so 1935. I actually don't know.
Something's happening in the world that's much more important to you at this point in time. For the next 10 years, your sole attention is only on a few key figures.
Yeah, so this is the most important thing happening in 1935.
Yeah.
And that's all all the news that I'll give it to, because I don't think it's actually that interesting.
All right. Well, look, I think I think that we both have the same issue. I think that our issue is that we have offshored all of our kind of pharmaceutical needs or contracts, or manufacturing needs. We do kind of take things to market. Yes, that costs a lot of money, but so does dropping bombs on children. And we do a lot of that. So I'm sure that we can fund some medical research. As I've said, altruism seems to be the main cause behind most of these discoveries, like stroke care, penicillin, um, insulin, so it really does strike me as a little bit ridiculous that we are really just allowing this to happen. And it's tacit. It's not like people are doing it intentionally. Well, some people are, but like think about how many retirement funds and hedge funds and things like that are tied up in pharmaceutical companies now.
Well, one of the general responsibilities of government is to maintain stability in whatever rules they have. They should be applied with stability, and that is a marker that has been shown to.
They should be enforced equally.
They should be enforced equally over time. So the point I'm getting at is that if that logic can flow through to that, even if you end up in a place like we are now, where there's certain industries that have that like natural oligopolies or monopolies have like emerged, it's difficult for the government to go in and essentially like nationalize the entire industry and destroy um, private companies that are worth billions, because uh,
Well, the companies will go to war. They'll just get like Wagner Group and a whole bunch of other people involved. I seriously think that, like, if they tried to take them on,
no, I mean that's not like that's not what I meant. I meant more like if you do that to one industry, you avoid
you
foreign
destabilize. Yeah, you
you
don't get foreign investment.
yeah,
Sorry.
you make foreign, yeah, you scare away foreign investment from other industries. If you nationalize a mine, it's going to be much more difficult to attract foreign investment to build a new car
But
plant next year.
why do we this is the thing, is why can't we be self-reliant? Throughout history, we have been self-reliant. And this idea that we have to bomb countries like thousands of miles away just in order to keep our way of life rolling isn't true. It didn't happen in like that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, no, I wouldn't connect the two. Like what I'm saying is the economics like shows us through history that it's the tenets are that trade allows two countries that are naturally better at one thing or another. If a country has a lot of arable land, it produces more sheep. If a country has a lot of hilly land, it produces more rice, etc. And if those two countries are allowed to focus on what they're naturally better at and trade, rather than being responsible for producing all their needs locally, both countries will be wealthier because they can produce what's naturally easier, focus on that.
Yeah,
That's more
but let me
profitable for
put it
both of
this
them.
way. There's no natural setting where sewing Nike shoes is like advantageous. You get 2 cents a day for that,
And
right?
that's
And
the
that's what
problem.
I'm saying. It's not about this like idea of being fair anymore, because no one's like that.
And that's the problem with using economic thinking that was developed 100 years ago and applying it to today. The economy has changed. So therefore those ideas, they're not wrong, they've expired.
It's horizontal, it's not vertical anymore.
Exactly right. Yes, nations have very little relevance. What's relevant is
Corporate
it,
identity.
it's power, like essentially accumulation of wealth and power. And companies, at least in free cash flow, definitely have more power than nations now.
All right. Well, my concern for this week was moderators. It was originally going to be pundits, but I'm going to go with moderators, and I'm going to distinguish that from Jannies.
Thanks, Wallace. Now, when you brought this up to me, uh, I recalled something that I'd seen in a channel uh, just the other day. I was talking about finance. And now you recall a couple of years ago, Reddit had this huge falling out with its team of moderators that moderate all their subreddits for free over them disabling access for.
Okay, so what I'm going to say is that I'm going to distinguish with Reddit and say that they're Jannies because they do it for free. But go ahead because your point still stands. I know what the point is.
Yes. So yeah, you'll be aware that so Reddit blocked access from third party mobile phone apps from being able to access their servers, and you were
So basically, it means that they were charging people to use their API, which would have been incredibly expensive for anyone who's super mod, like, you know, one of the 25 people who's in charge of, you know, the 500 most popular subreddits.
yes. So not only do they ban so well, yeah, exactly what you said. They set a price for access to the API so high that all these small, basically privately made apps that access Reddit on your mobile phone would no longer have access. So there was like on the iPhone, it was Bacon Reader. On Android, one of the biggest was Reddit is Fun, and I'm not sure if Bacon Reader was on Android. Anyway, the point is that all these third-party apps no longer worked. Um, you could only access Reddit with the official Reddit app, and you pointed out that the only people who could, the only people that could afford it would be a giant corporation, and that's exactly what happened. Google has a contract with Reddit to use Reddit's posts to train its language model, to train its AI.
Well, I think you're straying into bigger kind of territory here. So you're looking at the idea of net neutrality, the fact that forums as a whole have disappeared, the fact that we've only got Quora now instead of, you know, Yahoo Answers. A lot of the internet as a space, as a frontier, is starting to disappear with Reddit going the way of the dinosaur as well. A lot of Reddit is over moderated. It's oversaturated with content that not many people would like to see, and it is its own kind of circulatory hug box. But I want to talk about the bigger problem of moderation because I do think that Reddit Jannies deserve an episode entirely dedicated to them, including, you know, the history of Violent Acres and his subreddits, which included things like sexy abortions and jailbait. He was one of the most powerful mods on Reddit, one of the most powerful Jannies, I should say. But I want to talk about moderators who mostly work offshore in the Philippines. You won't see that appear on many Facebook contracts, and that's because they use shell corporations to hire these people so that they don't have to pay them properly. And they have a limit at most of these companies of at least 25,000 images a day that you have to cycle
This is
through.
like their KPIs. This is what they have to get through to keep their job.
This is their KPI. They have to go through 25,000 images that could contain child exploitation material. It could contain violence of the worst kind. It could contain, just depravity that one would not want to wish upon one's worst enemy. And these are things that these people see over and over again. And there have been suicides at these centers because of the fact that these people see things that don't agree with them.
That's like more than one image a second. That's like they're constantly being like, they have to look at something and immediately make a choice and move on. They don't even have time to process what they're looking at. They're being like, I mean, that's That's like how you treat someone in Abu Ghraib.
It's worse. It's. I mean, I don't want to say it's worse than Abu Ghraib, but
No, no,
basically
no, of
what they
course not.
do is that they,
No, not
yeah,
worse.
no, no,
No,
not worse than that.
I'm saying it's like,
But
yeah.
it does tie into that
Yes.
because the Rohingya are one of the worst affected groups by Facebook's content moderation team. Rohingya violence is hugely facilitated by Facebook and by their various.
So how is it being facilitated? I'm sure you're going to explain this when you just said that these moderators are like deleting all these horrific images they come across. So what are they doing?
Okay, so here's the thing is that the images that they delete may be horrific or they may be benign or they may not be. They may be culturally relevant to a particular point in time. So I'll give you an example of something that happened that I saw in real time. You can watch it there's a documentary called The Cleaners from 2018. In it, a guy makes the decision not to publish the photo of the young girl running down the road in Vietnam who's been covered in napalm because he classifies it as child pornography. He recognizes that it may be historically important, but he's not sure why. He says maybe the Vietnam War. That then follows on to huge protests in Sweden because it was an academic who posted it and it got deleted from their Facebook page. And of course, there was a huge fuss about that. Facebook defended it until the end, and then at the end said, yes, okay, it's historically relevant, and put it back up after a huge fuss had been caused.
But it wasn't enough that an academic had posted it. Couldn't you see the historic, like, you couldn't just see the good faith it was posted? Like, why
No,
take that position?
No, this guy took the position that, okay, this same guy watched someone kill themselves on a live stream, and he said, I couldn't have stopped that live stream before it finished or before he completed the suicide, because if I did, then I would have gotten in trouble because it would have been on my end if it had just been a joke or it had been a customer service issue.
Oh, so it's okay
That's
to.
how scared they are of losing their jobs. But I will go back to the Rohingya. Basically, these people have no cultural context for what they may or may not be kind of censoring. They're not given a background on that. They're given a background on 30 different terrorist organizations and flags and mottos and things like that that they're supposed to look out for. But how can they incorporate the entirety of human knowledge, plus, on top of that, actually what corporations might want from them in
Well,
terms of editing? Then you have to look at governments wanting to edit as well. Like, there's much more harsh laws in the EU under Article 13 and Article 15 in terms of internet censorship than there is anywhere else in the world. So these people in the Philippines who have no kind of cultural training in Western practice are deciding what it is that you see on your feed, on Twitter, on Facebook, all of this kind of stuff. For example, there was a tweet of a guy saying Erdogan is not a goat fucker while stuffing his dick into the Twitter turkey, obviously making a comment on Twitter censorship, deleted because of bestiality. And that's literally the reason the guy gave. And I believed him when he said it because it's him sitting at the desk going, delete, keep, delete, keep, delete, keep, and then explaining just very, very briefly why he believes it should be deleted.
yeah, because the immense like KPIs, they don't have time to like make value judgments. They don't care. They, as long as it looks like it could be like immoral, like, you know what I mean? Like, the system is creating this behavior.
Well, it's a panopticon system where they believe at any time they could be being watched.
That's it. Any of their decisions could always be brought up.
One of the women literally said this. She said, if I don't delete this post, it could cause a war, or it could cause self-harm, it could cause suicide. That's how seriously she took her job. Like, these are not people who are playing about, and they also have been threatened their entire lives with this idea of becoming a scavenger or a ravenger, which is someone who just goes through the garbage piles out in Manila to survive.
Are you saying that the workers that work here, like if they lose their jobs and don't have access to another one that's high paying enough, that's something that like they've seen their neighbors and friends like
That's
end up
something
in?
that their parents have told them,
Hmm.
that they will become a scavenger. Don't become a scavenger. Don't become one of them. Study hard in school and learn.
It's a different level of pressure than I think what the West is accustomed to.
Well, yeah. I mean, this one woman said that she saw a 6-year-old, and I don't usually give trigger warnings here, but if you don't want to hear something unpleasant, like, yeah, give it a couple of minutes. Yeah, I heard, saw a 6-year-old performing a sexual act on an adult male. Then the same 6-year-old fully undressed, covered in seminal fluid later on. So she immediately went to her supervisor and said, I want to quit. And the supervisor said, no, you have a contract. And also, you're helping save these people. You're preventing this from happening.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. It's and it's something that if we're shielded from, surely that starts to change how society acts when they don't actually understand reality anymore. When they don't understand that these kind of things are possible and are still happening. Like,
Well, a Facebook moderator literally said that. He said, you get to choose your own reality now. And I don't think that in a democratic society, if we're going to have fundamental kind of rules of discussion or rules of operating civilly with other people, that you can choose your own reality. So when it comes down to the Rohingya Muslims, right, why is it facilitating their genocide? I'll just come back to that quickly. They are the most oppressed minority in the world right now. If you post something negative about Rohingya in that part of the world, you are guaranteed to get upvotes, you are guaranteed to get comments on your post, you are guaranteed to get interaction. Facebook likes that. Facebook likes that in the algorithm. Facebook also likes the fact that there's a gray area that exists between showing the atrocities of a warscape and promoting violence. So, on the other side of this are the people who are desperately archiving a lot of the material that is uploaded to Facebook from war zones, because they look at it as evidence for potential, International Human Rights Commission trials, all of that kind of stuff. But it's deleted from Facebook because it's considered violent, or, there might be an ISIS flag captured at the last moment or something like that. So you really are walking a delicate line, because, again, like, how much do you delete? How much do you leave up there? And the majority of the content comes from Western countries. The majority of the content that is being deleted in these content farms or content mills.
it's journalists posting these images.
It's not just journalists, but there was an interesting case of a journalist posting an image who got banned. He posted 2 photos. One is the well-known photo of the little Turkish boy who drowned off the coast of Algiers, and he posted another child who had died as well. And the guy who deleted the photo was the same guy who made the decision about the little girl with the napalm, and his reasoning was that journalists show those kind of photos, but not in such detail, and he thought that it was a flood in the Sudan rather than a refugee child that had been drowned.
I read a commentary on that. Now, I'm not able to say if it was accurate, but it presented the story of the photograph of the boy who washed up on the shore. And apparently, someone had come forward and stated that the photographer moved the body once he found it on the shore more into the water to create a better shot. Like he actually manipulated the little boy's body before taking the photograph.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into that because if that did happen, that's disgusting. But I don't want to get sued by some. That's this is all a scripted piece of comedy, and we don't know if that's the truth or not. It's just a piece of opinion. But I will say that those two photos got banned, and so what the guy's solution was to cut the image of the children out of the photos and leave the silhouette of the bodies behind, because he said if the offensive thing is showing the bodies, then surely what I've done here is uh, enough.
I would think so, and it's like a very nice take on it. It's actually quite.
Well,
Yeah,
there's a
it's a
movie
commentary.
called Storytelling where there was a scene that was objected to. They were going to give it an X rating instead of an R rating, where there's a very kind of violent sexual encounter where this woman is instructed to say F me N word by a black professor that is her teacher. And all he did to censor it was put blocks of color over the top of both of them. And the Academy agreed. They said, that's fine. That's enough censorship. We just don't want to see it. We can hear it. We can hear them say that. It doesn't matter.
And that's the irony, because by creating this image without the bodies in it, both of you know that the image still has the same impact. It's still the same image. You don't need to see some poor person's like mutilated body on the screen to have the impact. Yet you both you're forced to pretend that the shocking bit is the flesh and not what it's actually conveying.
Even me saying the N word instead of the word itself is forcing you to say the word, as Louis C.K. would put it, inside your head. And I should really be doing the mental lifting there, but I don't want to. I don't want to put it out on record right now.
You've never been generous with your mental
with my
your
hands.
your mental strength. No, I meant in general. Like it's do you Oh, I was going to ask you something.
No, go ahead. Ask me.
No, I've lost my train of thought.
Okay. You were going to ask me something. We were talking about the idea of the N word and the power that word holds, I guess, which is
no, and then
kind of as a J.
I
the N's and the J's have gone back a long way, arguing which have been more put under. You go all the way back to Egypt, as Dave Chappelle would say, in the Oppression Olympics.
That does bring up the question about who were the real Egyptians. I mean, it has a whole different connotation if we take the modern Cleopatra take, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. I know that's a take that you ascribe to wholeheartedly.
No, not at all. I don't. Is there? Well, there is evidence about who the original people were. I'm sure, because you can.
Yeah, they were Ptolemaic Greek.
the pharaohs were Ptolemaic Greek, not necessarily the people. I don't know about the people.
I don't know about the people either, but the people in power, the people who were controlling everything, who had built the civilization.
You know what?
Ptolemaic Greek, like the people who built the civilization. Yeah. Okay.
No, and the other point is, we all recognize that Rome was multiracial.
Of course.
Ancient Egypt would have been multiracial. It was the biggest. It covered half the continent.
Would have been Kush. Like this idea that we're going to deny that Africa had kingdoms at any point in time, like, come on. You know what I mean? It's like, no. Yeah, they didn't invent the wheel, so what? I mean...
But those kingdoms created, like, grand societies. It connected cities that would have otherwise been isolated forever.
Well, the thing is that with a camel, do you need a wheel? I mean, yes, you do for grain and all of that kind of stuff, but I guess...
Well, they made grain, and if they didn't have the wheel, clearly they had the wheel enough to make grain. So they worked
something out. Yeah. That's the thing. That's what it always comes back to. I bring up that point because that's what it always comes back to when you're talking to a particular brand of person is they didn't invent the wheel, and therefore, there was no civilization there. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's the case.
The mark of civilization is inventing tools that help you, like
that are actually applicable to your setting, rather than being like Burks and Willis or whatever his name were, the names of those two idiots who went to the north of Australia were.
Well, exactly the same way that you see like peoples that spend generations in the coast become amazing fishermen who can read the skies. Like, you're not going to expect that out of people who have never been near the water.
It's like how you see people try and bring like liquids through in like a security line, like, oh, I'm sorry, was I not supposed to do that? It's just like, are you serious? I'm gonna have to wait for this person.
Well, that's another tricky question. How do you get things through airport security? It's so tough these days.
I find that sewing it into the abdomen of, women who appear pregnant but have been given like a late term abortion usually works.
Surely it's easy to just stuff something into your shoe, like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
Let's change the topic.
I'm sure. But no, look, these moderators, it's a real issue. It's they have been taken up in countries where there is very little bargaining power on the part of the people who are making the decisions. The cultural clash is quite different. At the time of the documentaries that I'm talking about making in 2018, Duarte was in power and was talking about, and these are his numbers, so don't come at me. He said, he goes, 3 million Jews were killed by Hitler. He goes, if 3 million of the degenerates that we have on the street now, basically like mentioning drug dealers or, the desperate and disenfranchised, then I would be happy. I would have basically served my purpose. And I found the kind of the direct line drawn to Hitler kind of disturbing. I also thought that it always comes back to that, doesn't it? Farrakhan has also, mentioned the idea that Hitler is someone that, being compared to is not necessarily such a bad thing.
Well, if the person doing the comparison puts it in a good light, how are you supposed to, like, why would you challenge that? Like,
you're saying any compliment is a good compliment.
Well, no, I'm saying
so
like,
you're saying you're like, oh, you are efficient like the Führer. You would be like, oh, I guess I am efficient like the Führer. I'm Hitler's number one guy,
well,
as Sam Hyde would have said.
Isn't that another way of interpreting what Duarte is doing? He's like putting himself in all the same like shoes. Not only
Duarte took fentanyl and said that it was the most dreamlike experience he's ever had, that it was almost like being in heaven.
Well, I imagine it would be. It's a very strong version of morphine.
Yeah, I know. So surely there is a man that understands the temptation and yet is able to resist.
And that's probably... maybe that's why. Maybe he's projecting. Maybe he's projecting his hate onto all the drug dealers.
Yeah.
Well, did, because it's in the past. But yes.
Onto all the drug users, you mean? The fact that they're unable to resist their temptation, whereas he's this great man who took fentanyl once for exceedingly strong pain and was able to not become addicted to it in the same way that someone who's been prescribed oxycodone over a period of like 10 years.
In the same way that someone who has to scavenge through the slums to survive might not have the fortitude to want to escape their life for a little bit.
Yeah, that's it. Might not have the fortitude to want to live in the reality that entails. Look, I found a Coca-Cola can. That's worth 10 cents more. Coca-Cola, if you're listening, we're always open to sponsorship offers.
I had heard a few years ago, this was when I was doing some studies in brand management, that Coca-Cola was expected to divest all its bottling plants because bottling is the next...
because that's where they run into trouble. That's where the unions and everything else happens, where people get their hands cut off and the rape and the torture happen.
Yeah, it's got to the point where Coca-Cola is just going to be a brand, and they were seriously considering... I don't know if they've gone through with it. I don't read their annual reports, but that they were going to just make less profit and pay someone else to bottle their product. Like it
Well, I
got
mean,
to the
they
point.
sell happiness. Come on. I mean, you can't sell happiness unless you cut off a few hands.
Well, I'm saying, like, can you imagine
Happiness.
the
Happiness.
for a corporation that's sole purpose is to make money for shareholders to do something that's more expensive? You have to understand, like, the severity, the gravity of the
It's
situation.
not more expensive when you have to deal with crisis management teams every week.
Well, exactly.
About someone getting raped or shot.
Their choice proves how severe it was. Like, even if you hear whatever, you collect all the stories we hear, and that must be only a small percentage of what's actually happening.
Well, it's like when Chiquita Banana had to put out a retraction tweet saying we haven't started a government overthrow since I can't remember what year it was now. So, yeah, I think that corporations, when divested from morality, which they've never been particularly attached to anyway,
well, they can't
operate in a way that strips humanity of its best qualities.
They're legally obligated to consider the interests of the shareholder as their primary directive. Like, by law, if a CEO doesn't do that, they can be charged. Like, they can't be moral. It's not that they choose
I know
not
we
to
were
be.
having this discussion about Henry Ford, and then you started going off onto that long tangent, and I was like, we can't include that in the episode anymore.
The efficiencies of the production line deserve to be talked about more because people don't understand.
Understand that this is coming from a J, okay? And by the rules of today's society, that makes it okay. No, but when we're talking about content moderation and farming jobs out to the Philippines, as I say, there have been several Senate subcommittees on this issue, and there was a woman who was initially in charge of the content moderation team who tried to walk a finer balance. So this guy said to her, it was amazing. He's like, my aides put into the Google's underage child sex, and this is what came up, pages and pages and pages of results. And it's like, well, so we're a search engine. That's what you went looking for. And then he's like, yes, but as the biggest search engine in the world, surely you should be the one that should have the most power to be able to control the fact that there's that many sites on your registry. And she's like, but as the biggest search engine in the world, that means that we have more pages to go through, as AI doesn't do that. That's a human task. Like, a human being actually has to moderate so that when you click on Google and you click on the first link, like, you know, a child getting raped doesn't come up, or someone getting their head cut off, or like a cat getting burnt to death.
So how will the world change now that very soon an AI will be able to do that? Like, there'll be no limit to the amount of moderation that can be applied. It'll be as easy as pushing a button.
Well, I guess it depends on how much moderation you actually think is acceptable. I guess the real question to me is, why are people uploading this content in the first place? Why are people wanting to see that? People are seeking it out.
Well, I mean, there are always going to be a small percentage of the population that are like...
But it's not a small percentage of the population. A lot of people have watched, more people than I would like to know have watched beheading videos.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. People, I've never watched one. I've always
No, neither have I. I would never. I don't want that on my brain.
But you're right. Like, particularly, like, yeah, on TikTok, these things spread. Young children are like looking at these and sharing them because they find it shocking and they want to shock their friends.
Yeah, it's kind of like a gag. It's like the man eating chicken from back in the day, where, you know, you would invite people in and you would say, I've got a man eating chicken. And there'd be a man sat there eating a chicken. And then you'd be like, wouldn't it be funny if you told your friends to come in here and see the man eating chicken? And they'd be like, you know, some of them would be pissed off, but some of them would send their friends along to see this new sideshow attraction.
And then pay a ticket to get in too.
Yeah, of course. That's the thing. It's like, wouldn't that be a funny prank that you played on your friends? So, you know, but I do find it interesting that you don't, there are certain things that you just refuse to to watch, because there is an appetite for this that is different to even violence in movies. I think people find more palatable than sex in movies, but this endemic of violence online and kind of just indifference it's astounding. Really, it is.
Is there something to be said about the the public beheadings and the public corporal punishments that earlier societies used to practice? Does that like keep the people entertained to a certain level? Is this something that's allowed?
Like, people came out and were entertained by that, right? But I think that when you're a social media company, you have a certain responsibility to not serve up violence wholesale without context and in a way that promotes harm.
But then the only way they can do that is to censor the results. And it's particularly Google, which is US based.
You don't have to censor the results, but you don't have to create an algorithm that's self-perpetuating in terms of creation of bubbles. The real answer is to remove censorship altogether. And people are responsible for their own decisions as to what they see and what they don't.
But see, I see censorship and the algorithm directing you content as two separate, like they're two separate issues, because censorship will delete things that will make things not be shown to you, but it's a normal part of their business to try and show you things you'd be interested in. You can't really legislate against that.
I don't think that playing into the worst impulses of the public, when we know that outrage... Okay, let me say this. What is the one thing that translates into... I've said it before, into all languages? Violence. Slapstick.
Oh, no.
Sex. Do you understand that these are the things that translate? And I get that the algorithms has to point you in a certain direction. However...
Well, that's my point.
Children in China have facial scans done, right? And they're only allowed to play a certain amount of video games per day, or else they start losing social credit points. Like, it actually shuts down the system on them. I don't think that that's the way to go.
No, I agree with you. But my point is that if Google, those trends are created naturally because, as you say, violence is attractive to some people. So if they're created naturally, the only way to stop them is for a human to go in and put a script in that limits the amount to censor the internet results.
And what I'm saying to you is this, is that instead of doing that, make it known the people who are actually visiting these sites. Make it open source. Make it open that your webcam has to be turned on when you visit these various sites. Like, at the end of the day, I don't really care. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that there's certain sites out there that...
Now, that's a very interesting solution.
If you want to visit them, then why don't we get to see who you are?
So one thing that Google can do very easily is keep a register of every IP that clicked onto a link. So they could very easily say, you're welcome to click on any link, and with the full knowledge that
you're going to be honey trapped with this child exploitation material, or that you're going to be honey trapped with this animal cruelty footage, that you're going to be honey trapped with this massacre footage.
How do you ensure such a system isn't used like to punish other types of knowledge seeking? Like, how do you keep the system from...
How do you keep checks and balances? I mean, at the moment, our system is that we have a whole bunch of people sitting in call centers in the Philippines and in India deleting knowledge that you might have that they think is inappropriate.
Yes, but well, that's true, but that's going to end naturally as AI becomes cheaper and quicker. Like, those people are all going to be fired in the next 5 years.
Yeah, but then what's the difference between the system that I'm describing and the AI system implementing?
Well, no, it is. Like, that's my point. But what I'm saying is, one, that this new level of moderation is inevitable, but...
I'm not saying it's a moderation. I'm saying let people publish whatever they want. Let them publish insanity if they want to. I really do think that you should have the right to do that. I don't think that a webcam is a perfect solution. I think that IP address honey trap is a good way to go about it. And at the end of the day, yeah, Google doesn't want to say that it sells its clients' information. It does. It already does. So we're talking about a problem that already exists and a solution that may kind of take some of the weight off of this. Because the internet has become sanitized. It's become much more of a dead space. I'm not saying that I want these terrible things on there, but there has to be a reason why people upload them at the rate that they do. And if we want to understand it, we have to let it happen, and then we have to study the people that do it.
So at the moment, I would say most of these are now being blocked. Like it's been some time since that case, I imagine, because the general, well, as far as I understand, like your web results now are very heavily like moderated,
Censored, yeah.
censored, and well, what's that? So what you're arguing then is let me ask you this question: are you arguing that it's they shouldn't be censored and we should rather like just use publicity to, or are
I
you
think
saying
we
both?
should open it up. I think that we should open it up, and I think that people don't like to be publicly shamed. I think that naming and shaming the first few people who access certain types of information or certain types of,
So at the moment, if people do end up in one of these like honeypot sites that still ends up on the web results, presumably like a small percentage are, you know, prosecuted by authorities. Would this, if you use public shaming, then aren't you going to just scare people away from using the internet for this? Like the people who are seriously looking for this and who don't stumble upon it, the people who are looking for this will just switch back to DVDs or something.
they'll switch back to analog. So what?
But
That means that their communities are smaller. They can't actually operate in the same way. And the internet
okay,
is a safer place for everyone else.
no, I see that. I can see the value of that.
I don't think that everyone should have to give out their ID or their IP address. I don't think that everyone's internet traffic should be monitored, but I do think that sites that have illegal content, like, yeah, I do think that open up the web, don't deregister them, but every person that visits, put their face up. It's like the Nathan For You board, the popcorn sharer and masturbator board.
But surely, if one of these websites had a homepage that said, "Put in your like government issued ID number and take a photo of your face before entering," like they would get no traffic. Would people still visit?
People
Like, I don't know.
So if you didn't, so if you clicked on it right and they had your IP address,
With just the IP address, you need to prove who it belongs to. It's not like that's how the
yeah, no, it's just a household, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
that's how the file sharing cases like have failed.
fell apart.
So
Yeah.
you'd have to have like a government registry of some sort. So you'd
No,
have to
I
have
don't like the sound of that. See, look,
yeah.
I generally just think that everything should be open. Like, I don't think that people's appetite for these things go away because you delete or censor or screen them. I think that the people who want to find them anyway, particularly with violence and gore images. I don't want to go into child exploitation because I just think it's such a heavy area that it doesn't make well for a light, frothy entertainment show. And I think all of our views are the same, that, the people who seek it out need serious,
What's your
let's say, help.
what's your view on honeypots? Because you've told me the story before of how the To Catch a Predator series ended.
I think, okay, so to fill people in on how To Catch a Predator ended was basically To Catch a Predator didn't result in a lot of prosecutions. It resulted mainly in public shaming, which I did have a problem with. So I guess I'm arguing counterfactually to myself from about 10 minutes ago. But many of the people, they couldn't secure a prosecution because it was seen as entrapment. Chris Hansen coming out and embarrassing them was seen as punishment enough. Many of them, the recidivism rate was very high. The same predator got caught 3 times by them in different stings. So it was overall not a production that I would say was not riddled with issues.
Do you think any of the people that were caught were actually entrapped, like genuinely? Like they would not have ever gone through with it if it wasn't for the encouragement of the plant?
Okay, so the way that it ended was that a guy who was on the state's I think Senate circuit. He was on the circuit of appeal for some state. He was a judge or something like that, a district attorney, something legal, but also that had to do with votes. So he decided to, instead of show up to the house, he decided to put a bullet through his head. They don't know if he realized that it was the Chris Hansen predator hunters who were waiting for him there, or if he had just suddenly realized what he'd done and how far he was actually willing to take this, and that was the only way to stop himself from becoming an offender. But the show stopped because they pushed the limits with that guy in terms of how far they took the phone conversations and kind of the enticements to meet.
Something that people might not realize, a big difference between the USA and this country, is that in the USA, judges are voted by the general, populace. It is. It's like being the town mayor. And how does that change the meaning of justice when it's a popularity contest?
Yeah, when you can suddenly say that this person did this X, Y, or Z, or is soft on crime. But look, two sides can be wrong in a situation, right? When when a gay guy goes cruising for underage teens and gets F-bashed, right? No one's right there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. No one was in the right in that situation. So I don't know what to say. Sometimes people are just fucked up and we don't like that as an outcome. But I think that people are uploading so much of this, and it was quarantined to areas of the internet like Live Leak and, certain subreddits and stuff. The problem with the general media is that they take niche areas and they make it available, like a paid subscription service, for example, and make it available to everyone.
Well, they promote it through their own journalism.
Yeah, of course they do. So that's the thing, is that, do you not remember that first Fox Media piece on Anonymous where they had a truck blowing up and stuff like that? It was so hyperbolic and over the top, 4chan and Anonymous are coming for you. It was insane to the point that we didn't realize the kind of more insidious risks.
The general attitude on the internet back then was that when the media misunderstood, the what do you call it, the underground web, that it was to be ridiculed, and they would go out of their way to be trolls and to.
Well, think about that SVU episode.
Well, hasn't it all backfired now that the media is constantly reported on things that were benign and were fake? You're not going to be able to find anything that isn't sanitized anymore, and that means that people that look for this stuff, instead of being caught because those websites are by the if they're not honeypots at the beginning,
by design, to make you anonymous.
Well, no, all I'm saying is that those websites, as they continue, the authorities do find the owners and either shut them down or keep them running as honeypots. Sooner or later, I would say that people doing illegal shit will get caught.
Yeah, you'll get done eventually if you're doing something.
But by closing down the internet, you're not. I don't know if you're solving anything. All you're doing is making them turn to, like we were saying before, like DVDs, like other means.
But I
So,
don't think that you are closing down the internet. That's what I'm saying to you, is that I think that by opening up the internet,
oh no, I'm talking
you're
about what's
just
happening now.
acknowledging. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
I
was,
agree with you. I agree that right now, by sanitizing what we've done on the internet, like,
we haven't achieved anything good. We've just brushed the problem under the rug. We've just pretended it's not there.
no, we've kicked the can down the road a little bit. So basically, people choose to be in their own hug boxes or their own echo chambers, and that is then overseen by the moderator, which might as well be your god, as they have the decisions over your online life or death, much like Big Pharma has substantial impact over your decisions over life and death in this corporeal form. Well, I do have to thank you, Binkus, for sitting down with me and sharing your thoughts this week.
Thank you, Wallace.
And thank you all for listening. It's been a bit of a long one, but hopefully worth your time. As we say, in this world of false prophets, let us be your shepherds. All right. See you next week.